So my hope is that you will get a great opportunity to know these amazing folks, and we'll get an opportunity to know you and your questions and have a really great conversation together this morning. Just a little bit about the policy programs at Aspen generally. There's these two different parts, there's three different parts to the Aspen Institute, and many that come to the Ideas Festival know our big public programs, and that's a great entry point. And at the same time, at Aspen, we have a set of leadership programs that now have about 3,000 or 4,000 people around the world who have been deeply engaged in multi-year leadership programs at Aspen that help really incentivize these leaders to think hard about their own mission, their own role in transformation of societal problems. And then we have this other side of Aspen, which is now 30 plus policy programs strong. I like to say that on one side of Aspen, we invest in leaders for life. What they choose to then put their sights on might change over time, but we stick with them. And in the policy programs, we focus on these really wicked, complex challenges that are facing society, and we build tables of leaders to solve them. And the leaders are not always what you expect to see on a public platform. There are leaders from community, there are leaders from academia, there are leaders from policy. We like to shake it up. And so in this new era of Aspen, we really are trying to think about how all of these things come together in exciting ways. And the financial security program is a really fun place to do some of that because the way we see it within our vantage point, the stability of the financial stability of individuals and households is at the core of being able to take the kind of risks in the economy that lead to prosperity. And also, the stability and security at the household level is part of what can preempt issues of populism. It's part of what can create a strong democracy and a strong economy. So we tend to focus at the financial security program on the kinds of critical financial challenges that are facing American households. And through that consumer lens, we then look at some of those macro implications and we try to figure out how do we collectively solve those problems. So you're gonna get a little microcosm of the kinds of communities we're building and the kind of conversations we're having, not just inside the financial security program, but at Aspen tables, both here and in our work around the course of the year. So with that, I wanna introduce our panel and then I'm gonna set us up a little bit. But to my left, to your right, is Efosa Ojomo. Did I say that right? I've said it like 6 times to you, but yeah. I'm so excited. Putting this program together, I was like, there's still a missing piece, and I found your work. And Efosa is the author of a new book, The Prosperity Paradox: How Innovation Can Lift Nations Out of Poverty. He's a senior research fellow at the Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation at Harvard Business School. So thank you for being here with us.
It's my pleasure.
And beside Efosa is Courtney Eccles. And Courtney is the director of Secure Choice, which is the new automatic enrollment retirement system for the state of Illinois, one of the first in the country. And so that's out of the Illinois State Treasurer's Office, and Courtney runs all facets of that program, and we'll get to hear a bit about that. And we've known you in your past life as a policy director for the Woodstock Institute, a very really well-regarded and high-impact player in Chicago. So thanks for joining us for that. And to Courtney's left is Joanna Smith-Ramani, who I have the privilege of working with every day. Joanna is the managing director of the Aspen Financial Security Program. And so my job, we're actually gonna, I'm guessing between us, co-moderate, co-deep dive into what we know from our programmatic work in the course of the conversation today. But thank you all for joining us. So here's how the conversation's gonna go. Well, actually, I have no idea, because we're gonna make it up. It's gonna be more interesting for you if we kind of just have a good rapport as well. But the premise of this conversation this morning is that we all talk about middle class. It's this whole issue of inclusive growth and shared prosperity and how we get there and how we fell out of having it is a big part of the conversation happening at the Ideas Festival. A lot of times, the shortcut from going from how do we rebuild the middle class goes straight to just thinking about jobs and income. And that's an incredibly important piece. But there's really also important statistics to show that we conflate middle income and middle class a little too much. And so, for example, Pew Research Center a few years ago looked at some striking research that showed that if you looked at two households, they looked at households, African-American households with kids and white households with kids that were solidly middle income. They looked at the next generation to see of those kids who was middle income still. In those white households, almost 50% of households were still middle income. In African-American households, it was less than 15%. There is something very important about wealth and other dimensions of middle class that is different than just income, and these things are really connected, but it's important sometimes to unpack the other dimensions of what makes for resilience in the face of shocks, and that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today, and kind of think about that, not just in the past, how did we structure that additional ability to be resilient, but how do we need to think about that in the future, and what has actually gone awry in the space of time. So you've probably also seen some of the statistics of the wealth of the top 20% of households now over the last 15, 20 years going up by $21 billion, and the wealth of the bottom 50% falling by 900 million. And so we have a median wealth in the bottom 50% of households in America today that is at 1% of the total wealth owned in the country. So these are issues that we need to think about systemically and not just individually. And so I've got some great systems thinkers here. So Efosa, let me start with you, just in terms of this broader issue of shared prosperity and how you think about these issues where you sit.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot, Ida. And thank you guys. I thought we would have 4 people. And these are the 4 people.
Because of the time, not because of the topic.
Right.
Not that you didn't want to spend that time with us.
No, just because of the time, 8 o'clock. So, as Ida said, co-authored a book called The Prosperity Paradox, How Innovation Can Lift Nations Out of Poverty. And chapter 2 in that book is titled, Not All Innovation is Created Equal. And I think what I'd love to do is just talk about how we think about innovation to give us a framing so that we can use that in this discourse and as you guys continue to have conversations at the festival. And so, broadly speaking, we look at innovation as something, a change in a process that really helps you transform inputs of lower value into outputs of higher value. And so this could be a high-tech product. This could be a simple process that you institute in your organization. It doesn't really matter. And then when you step back and look at how innovations impact the economy, there are really 3 types. The first type is what we call market-creating innovations. And these market-creating innovations are innovations that transform really complicated products into products that are simple and affordable, so many more people can afford them. And so a simple example would be 120 years ago, the car. It was a toy for the rich. And Henry Ford comes and says, I want to make a car for the average American. People said he was crazy. We didn't have the roads. His investors, a few investors left him. But he built the infrastructure necessary and created the Model T, and the rest is history. We all have computers in our pockets right now, smartphones. 60 years ago, computers would be as big as this room. They were only available to people in big universities or big organizations that could afford them, cost millions of dollars. But over time, we made mini computers, personal computers, and now today you can get a computer in your pocket for a couple $100. The thing about market-creating innovations is that they target what we call non-consumers, people who would benefit from consuming a product or a service, but they don't have access to capital or the skill to operate it or the time. And these, we found, are really a strong foundation for creating sustainable prosperity. Because if you step back and think about it, all of a sudden you had millions of people who couldn't afford something now able to afford it. You now need so many more people to be able to make the product, sell the product, market, and so on and so forth. So that's the first kind. The second are what we call sustaining innovations. They're innovations that make good products better. And so my guess is no one in this room has a phone that's over 10 years old, right? You get the new iPhone, Samsung, or whatever else, and you get a new camera, a better memory, and so on. Now, those are also important because they keep companies vibrant and exciting. When you get a new car, you've got new heated seats and things like that. They're important, but they don't transform economies like market-creating innovations. Toyota does not need a completely new distribution system, a completely new manufacturing plant when they want to put heated seats in their cars. So that's the second type, but they're important too. The third type are efficiency innovations. And when we think about efficiency innovations, these are innovations that help you do more with less. They essentially help you make good products cheaper. But the key here is that these innovations are targeted at people who can already afford the products. And so if you look at auto manufacturing in the US as an example, right? And you take, after 1994, we signed NAFTA, many auto jobs went to Mexico, right? But if you look at the cars that are being made in Mexico, about 85% of them come into the U.S. For sale, right? And the cost of those cars aren't drastically cheaper. They're not targeting people who can't afford cars. So efficiency innovations are things like, you outsource a certain part of your operations to other places, or you invest in automation and so on. And I think it's important to understand that no innovation in and of itself is bad, because if you don't invest in efficiency innovations, well, your competitors will. But it's important for us to step back and appreciate the impact that these innovations have in our economies and for organizations. The last thing I'll touch on here is that with efficiency innovations, the big purpose is they free up cash flows. Right? Imagine going to your manager saying, I'd love us to try this new thing out. It's going to save us 20% of our costs, and we can all get big fat bonuses at the end of the year or something. If you think about it, you're never really going to get fired for suggesting an efficiency innovation. They free up cash flows, and I think what's important is if we can take those cash flows back and funnel them into market-creating innovations, then we have this beautiful cycle that can keep the economy vibrant. And so that framing has really helped us see how different innovation activities can impact the economy.
I think we're going to use your frame throughout the conversation, I think. And one thing I would ask as I pivoted over to Courtney and Joanna is, it strikes me that knowing about 3 different kinds of innovation doesn't necessarily, and even how that creates opportunities for markets to create prosperity and intentionally shared prosperity. It's not just businesses that can use those tools of understanding, right? So this is a very much a tool and an example. We could use government examples across time as well on market creating innovations and things like that. So, and again, I think for all of us, we're going to keep trying to anchor this back on a frame of how do you help people have more access to capital, more access to income in ways that kind of help them be producers in the economy, not just consumers. Courtney, I'm so excited for you all who haven't been following, and I would understand why. There's about 55 million workers in America today who don't have access to workplace-based retirement savings. Most of that is in the small business sector and in contractual workers. But one of the things that's shifting is the role of the employer in the social contract. So I would love for you to start a little bit with the market-creating innovations that you're working on for the room. And then, Joe, I'm thinking a little bit from the credit side. Like if we think about an individual's financial continuum from debt all the way to retirement security, like I'd love for you guys to unpack a little bit about what you're seeing in these spaces.
Sure. Thank you. So, yeah, I'm going to try and touch on a couple of different pieces, and it's incredibly helpful to have the the layout of kind of the different types of efficiencies. So my hope as we think about this conversation on growing the middle class and thinking about wealth and savings is to give you a very practical, real-life example of what we are trying to do in Illinois and in a number of other states to really address one piece of a much larger problem around the need to create access to savings vehicles. So in this case, it's retirement savings, which I know is everyone's favorite topic, especially at 8 in the
Ida's favorite
morning.
topic.
The sexiest
And we're
conversation
missing
ever.
a speaker too. Phil Waldeck, who was president of Prudential Financial's retirement, was supposed to be here, and in fact will be here later today, but is someplace on the tarmac in some unknown city. So, so Courtney's got the entire retirement part of the conversation on her.
I will do my best. But you know, what we really are trying to do in Illinois and Oregon and California and a couple of other states actually is address this issue of lack of access, right? And certainly when we think about sort of the market innovations, what we've seen is that in the retirement space, kind of across state lines and nationally, you've got about 50% of your working population that doesn't have access to an employer-sponsored plan. And when you look at the research, basically everyone saves if they can do it through their payroll and if it's easy and they don't think about it. And it's like 1 in 20 who don't have access will actually go out and open an IRA or some sort of other savings vehicle. So from, I think, a state and frankly national perspective, it's a real problem when you've got folks working their entire life not able to access traditional savings means and potentially retiring either into poverty or just above poverty or are completely reliant on Social Security. So that's the super fast setup for our program. But what we're doing in Illinois is we passed legislation that requires every employer with 25 or more employees, full-time or part-time, to either go ahead and offer an employer-sponsored plan, a 401k, 403b, what have you, or if they can't for whatever reason, then they'll facilitate Secure Choice, which is the name of our program. And what facilitate means is they'll register, they'll provide the program with their employee information, and they'll facilitate payroll. So employers don't make contributions. They are not plan administrators, so they have no fiduciary responsibility. They don't make any decisions about who administers the program or the investments that are part of it, and they don't do any reporting or anything like that. So it really is a very different path than the employer-sponsored plan. We, as the program, take on all of that management, administration, and fiduciary responsibilities. So this program is the treasurer serves as chair. It's a bipartisan board that oversees and manages it. On a day-to-day basis, I work directly with our board, and we have a whole series of private sector partners that we work with. So sort of tying in a totally different piece, I think one of the things I'm hoping folks take away today is that when you think about solutions and systemic solutions, when we talk about increasing wealth and increasing savings, you know, I very strongly believe that government really does need to play a role in that, and I think it's also a place in which understanding the huge power of public-private partnerships and the interactions between government, private sector, and philanthropy if what you really want to achieve is widespread systemic change. So that was my digression there. Coming back to the program, so we have a private sector firm that traditionally works in the retirement space. They offer small business 401ks and IRAs. They do all of the administration for us, a census. They do the record keeping. We work with a small handful of investment managers. So we have a very simple fund lineup because, again, the goal here is simplicity for the saver, simplicity for the employer. Individual workers are auto-enrolled into the program. They can opt out at any time. But they're enrolled into default. So it's a 5% contribution rate into a target date fund. Our target date default fund is the BlackRock LifePath series. We also have State Street funds and Charles Schwab funds. And the individual participant can lower their contribution rate, they can increase their contribution rate, they can select a different fund option. But ultimately the goal is if you want to save, you don't have to do anything. You can start, you're doing it through your payroll. It goes right into a Roth IRA that is portable for them, and they can move with it, and they have ownership of that. So that was a really fast,
No, it's
really
good.
fast outline.
And just in the sense of how that's going to play out in terms of a market creating innovation, you know, it's pretty expensive and the kinds of opportunities for individuals to get into is hard. So, and again, this is not just happening in one state. Like California, July 1st goes live with their state-run retirement savings. That's 7 million new workers.
Yep.
That's 600,000 or 700,000 employers that will now be connecting. So there's a new floor for retirement savings, and there's about 25 different states at this point in study sessions or actually creating this kind of legislation. So all of a sudden, there is a forcing mechanism of a new market because employers now have to make a choice. We know that many of them have wanted to. I might want to do a 401k, but it's just never. I don't have an HR group someplace else, So it's like it's on my list, but it's never the thing that's urgent for me. Yeah. So this kind of you must enroll in either the state facilitated plan, or this is the chance to go find a 401k. And now there's national legislation that has changed retirement so that it allows groups like Prudential or a Census or others to pool different companies in these open multiple employer plans. So the forcing mechanism of all of a sudden hundreds of thousands of employers in the country having to make a choice about a retirement plan means that there's also opportunity for the private sector to go in and serve a market. So so I think that comes to your market creating innovation in some ways. And of course, for all of us, moving that wealth needle, from zero to something. We know that from the Urban Institute, as little as $250 in a savings account is a difference between somebody being able to be resilient and stay on track or spiral back into poverty or an increasing cycle. So there's actually some pretty small dollar amounts that are important with this.
Has anyone ever met anyone, maybe your friends, who's like, man, I cannot wait to retire in poverty? Like, oh my gosh, it's just like, I got 5 years. And so I think what that shows is there are so many non-consumers of these benefits that the organization is now creating. We just have to figure out an innovation that would make it simple and affordable, which I think is what you guys are doing, which is just remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, let me pick up on that. So one of the things I love about what's happening with Courtney in this framework of FOSA, which has been really helpful, is that in my mind, in trying to imagine like what is this new middle class that is better than what existed because it is inclusive, right? There's this like very rosy picture of what we used to have because it felt so strong, but women who were head of household by themselves weren't included. Families of color were not included. It also wasn't like everyone by their bootstraps got it, which we also like to remember. It was very purposeful, systemic, federal policies, state policies, employer roles, right? There was a lot that actually helped white families get into the middle class. So it really is like, what is the innovation that we need to make it for everyone across different sectors? And that's what I've been trying to like imagine in my mind and in our work. So this idea of like, what are the institutions we have that can help families really help us build an inclusive middle class that helps us have a strong democracy? Our employers, our worker organizing organizations, our government, our philanthropy and other civic associations. But we have to reimagine what it's going to be in this labor market and in the world that we're building now. And this reimagining of what government can do. For those of you who are not in like the retirement space, retirement is kind of the, outside of housing, the most kind of democratized way we have access to wealth in this country. Like retirement's wealth, right? It's investments, it's your own capital. It's different from savings in a lot of different ways. So that's why we keep talking about retirement. It's an essential part of your wealth, the same way owning a home is in this country, which is like trying to get people access to it is critical. But reimagining that this doesn't have to be something an employer does, it can be something the state's highest and best use is for. And then the employer can do other things. And there are other kinds of wealth creating or financial stability creating benefits they can offer that may be their highest and best use in this new version of a middle class is I think what people are really exploring now. Some examples of that, and I think of them as like lowercase benefits, because if anyone's like a benefits person in this room and I say benefits, they're like, what are you talking? There's all these requirements and all this stuff. So imagine a world where like, when I say benefits, it doesn't trigger like a million tax laws, but it triggers your family financial security. So things like repaying student loan debt as an employer benefit. That seems like something employers could be well suited for that can help clear away the debt for most families, and it'll be almost all
And again,
Americans.
facilitating that, not
And
necessarily,
facilitating it.
Through.
Well,
yeah.
they would match, I mean, like a retirement account, right? They can help pay down student loan debt as an actual benefit. Clear away your debt, then you can actually invest more in retirement, invest in buying a home, invest in other wealth-creating opportunities. More and more employers are offering emergency funds, so small cash transfers when you really need it, so that when your car breaks down, it doesn't mean you can't get your kids to daycare and you can't get to work. Is that something an employer is best suited to do if they can get out of the retirement business, right? Like, there's a set of things families need to thrive. It is evolving as the family financial security needs are changing over time. And at FSP with IDA, what we've been trying to think about, what are those essentials that families need and workers need? And then let's be agnostic and not like stuck in 20th century like labor employer visions, and just figure out like who should offer it. And it could be government, it could be the employer, it could be like a totally outside service.
New institution.
New institutions that offer it. It could be your trade association that offers it. But trying to get our heads out of, well, the employers used to do this and they should do it, or why isn't government doing this? And the last thing I'll quickly add that makes me so excited about what Courtney's doing and other states is that in an innovation standpoint, you guys are building a really big platform that could do other things. So we're starting with retirement. I don't know if Fosa, if you agree with this, right? But it's like,
Yeah.
you think about states have these lottery systems and all they do is let people buy lottery and lose their money. I spent years trying to convince a particular state to start selling savings tickets off of it because they already had this really big system that got everywhere and in every poor neighborhood and whatever. But yeah, you guys are investing in a system that then could layer other benefits over it, or that the private sector could leverage the system and the access and then build other products off of it that get to the same set of people that are hard to reach. So anyways, you can tell like my mind's exploding with these ideas, but it's really like what are the new rails we're building and the new institutions that can offer things to families?
Or watching other institutions that exist already reinvent themselves.
That's right.
And use technology differently. So I don't want to give us whiplash as a panel, but I do want to pivot the conversation a little bit to a different piece, which is the role of technology in this innovation right now. Because again, these efficiency innovations that are freeing up cash flow, that are automating, this is part of a future of work conversation. But there's also a lot going on with financial technology that I think we need to think about in this space. And so I want to have that as a backdrop as I pivot us, because I think one of the things that we're really cognizant of, and we try to be explicit about, is that we are often talking about savings and wealth building, and the pervasive undercurrent right now, and we even heard it on the opening panel, is with people living lives of more and more economic precarity, why should it be on them to save? Like this is like why are we how dare you make somebody who has limited income save? And I think that or it's really putting even more risk on the individual or more responsibility on the individual. We should be thinking about that. I think that at FSP, we know enough from the household perspective that people truly just want lives of economic dignity, and part of that dignity and agency is about being able to provide for their families. They want to save. They love the opportunity to save as much as any of us do. So I think that that's been sobering for us, but it's also, we don't hide from the fact that most of the growth of consumer debt in this country has not been for enhanced consumption, but because labor and wages have been so flat for so long, people have managed their financial lives by taking on credit, some of which has not been productive for their long-term financial well-being. So this is another place where innovation is happening. This is another place where we're thinking hard about how to figure out how to help people create liquidity in their lives without damaging themselves. So I wonder if you have any perspective on that. And I know, Joe, I'd love for you to share a little bit about what Epic has been doing with that. And you've probably been thinking about this as well for kind of your space. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the debt side of things.
I'll just give a quick example because education's important. It's key to lead a prosperous life, especially in developed countries. But if you look at student loan debt today, right, 45 or so million people in America are managing close to $2 trillion in debt. It's like 1.6 trillion. Yes, I can. So education is important. But if you look at student loan debt in the U.S., about 45 million Americans now have close to $1.6 trillion in debt. But then when you look at many people who are graduating college and entering the workforce, close to 50% of them are working in jobs that don't require college degrees, right? And so they're going to struggle to pay that debt off. There's a program that just started in San Diego. It's called the Income Share Agreement, where the state, the city, essentially funds people to get retrained on a particular skill so that they can get a job that pays them a little bit more money. And what that does is essentially they don't have to pay back until they get a job, right? And so you're now tying this idea of me being able to increase my income to my, essentially the idea of me paying back my loan, right? And so the incentive is for the institution to make sure they train people so that they can be more productive. And so I think there are many programs that we would have to rethink if we want to fix many of these systemic issues. That's just one example.
Would you say that's an efficiency innovation? Where is that in your categorization?
So
We're
I would
obsessed with how to fit it in.
I know, I want you to apply it.
I would categorize that as market creating, because when you think about the number of people working in jobs today that want to upskill themselves, but they just don't have the $10,000 to get a loan or to get, into a program that could get them better trained. They just forego.
So they're under-consuming education.
So they're under-consuming.
Okay,
right?
great.
So
just to kind of quickly touch on a couple of things, and again, I'm going to kind of pull it down into sort of the example of the program, but to your point about sort of this fear of getting people to save when there are so many burdens and decisions they have to make with what they already have. And I think that's a very valid consideration, but we hear it all the time in Illinois. Well, you can't force people to save. They don't have enough money, which is really rich coming from an employer who could pay them more. But, getting past that.
Truth talk.
Our first wave of enrollment was with employers that have 500 or more employees. And most people think if you've got that many employees, you've already offering a plan. But what we're really seeing is that was a space with temp agencies, staffing companies, entities that own and operate a number of franchises. So we're talking about lower income workers, many of them with variable hours and perhaps multiple jobs. So our participation rate with that cohort of folks is 70%. We have about a 30% opt-out rate. That includes the folks who opt out in the first 30-day windows, but also we track the folks and include that number with people who call in and maybe opt out after they run their first paycheck or so. And for me, that's huge, because what this is about is giving people their own choice and not deciding whether they can or can't, but providing them with access. And I think it's just incredibly promising
So it went
to look
from
at it.
probably what was, like you said, 1 in 20 was saving on their own.
That's generally
So now 7 in 10
Yep.
with this as a rate. Okay.
Yep. So I think that's one key piece. And the other thing, to sort of your point about the considerations that we can build into models. Again, the hope here is that everyone saves this money for retirement and utilizes it there. But we absolutely heard concerns around, well, if I'm saving this, I may need access to it. And so part of our selection of a Roth IRA was that it does enable access to those contributions without penalty. And that's just a sort of a helpful security consideration for folks who say, if I need it, if I need that $250, I can go take it. And we've actually seen movement in and out of accounts, and it's something we'll be considering and monitoring, and maybe down the road we'll think about a way that perhaps we could attach some sort of savings vehicle. I call that Secure Choice 2.0 or 3.0. We've got to start with this
But
first.
we'll be doing, and I want to come to Joe, but just
Yep.
to flag it, there's this whole idea, because I think there's actually hybrids of your innovation models too, right? And so there's hybrids of savings and credit, and there's hybrids of savings and retirement savings. So understanding the need for long-term security and short-term liquidity, and using the rails that Joanna talked about, there is an initial set of experiments going on here and in other countries around building an emergency savings account alongside a retirement account. They're calling it sidecar savings or emergency savings. So in that sense, One of our partners in the UK, Nest Pensions, which is kind of when the entire country did something like what Illinois is doing, they created a default pension plan. So they've got about 7 million workers in that plan now and about 650,000 employers. They've built out a sidecar pilot. Prudential, who's in the room, is experimenting with sidecar emergency savings, and then some of the states are. So early next year, when some of the initial numbers are in, we're going to have our first meeting, first event, really kind of saying what this is doing for people's financial lives to have both short and long-term savings options in that space. And I do want to pivot to some of the credit pieces too, Joe. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that debt in this country is a big part of what's going to be challenging to create a really inclusive middle class. 77% of Americans have debt. That's a lot. Not everyone is doing poorly with it. That's important. Like actually having good credit and being able to borrow to go to school, borrow to buy a home, borrow to invest in your own small business is obviously a critical part of how we function in this country. So having healthy credit is part of having a healthy financial portfolio. But part of the rethinking institutions and rethinking the kinds of products we need is being really honest about the state of debt in our country, particularly around debt that used to be viewed as very productive, but is actually not helping families achieve more financial security, which sadly includes student loan debt, also debt. Enormous medical debt. I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I was in medical debt.
Oh yeah, medical, see, we work together. Medical debt on cue. And in all of these cases, it's really important to know, especially thinking about an inclusive middle class, that the way families of color and women experience this debt is just really different. It's more debt, it's debt at higher cost, it's debt that's harder to pay off because of other discrimination in hiring and salaries. So where we need really good innovation is really thinking about both how do we clear this stuff out and how do we get really creative, like the really great example Fosa gave about it is essential to be able to have medical care. It is essential to be able to go to whatever the kind of school, whatever the training is. Let's use education broadly defined. It costs money. And so who is investing in that for you and how are you financing it in this whole new world? So yeah, I just like that. That isn't we used to not think of the middle class. The only debt you thought of was how do you buy the home? But now really coming into our 21st century inclusive middle class with shared prosperity that thinks deeply and looks at data about where we are starting from has to include innovation and new institutions really getting into the credit debt space.
Yeah. We have time for questions and answers, and we can go all day ourselves, but are there any opening questions in the room? Yes.
I think we have Phoebe, are you doing mics? Yeah.
Has any insurance company or other entity developed a savings product for gig workers, for the increasing number of contract workers that are going to populate society?
Yeah, so I mean, yes, there's a lot of interest in it, and there's a lot of ways that we just had 2 weeks ago in San Francisco. We produced a report around portable non-employer retirement benefits. And the room was curated but full of plan providers, retirement plan providers, some insurance folks, but also payroll and payment providers and other potential facilitators, platform companies around this. Of course, there's lots of legislative pieces right now around what are the benefits you can provide if you're not in a W-2 relationship, right? So there's a whole meta problem right now about classification and how benefits usually accrue through a specific classification. Yeah, so in the US, anyway, somebody else explain it. Somebody else say a little bit about this.
I mean, I can say, in the US, if you are an independent worker, which is a 1099 worker, which is, many home healthcare workers, many childcare providers, not just Uber drivers and, Etsy workers, your relationship, which is, by the way, hugely miscategorized in this country. So many people should be, when you are a W-2 employee, like how I am at Aspen Institute, then they can, through tax code and other kinds of labor laws, offer me certain benefits. There's like a contractual relationship we have with each other. When you're an independent employee, you don't get those, but if your affiliate, like if your Uber wants to offer you stuff, then it starts triggering, oh, well, are you a W-2 employee? Does Uber need to pay taxes, payroll taxes on behalf of you? You just become more expensive to them, essentially. And because, this idea that we're like shifting into gig work versus there's always been an enormous amount of gig labor, especially in low income, especially in healthcare. Pardon?
But also,
Well, also high income. I mean, in our work, that is often by choice, right? There's plenty of high-paid consultants who don't mind the income volatility, who like the independence, who make enough money to and have the sophistication and the access to find the financial products and services and to curate it for themselves. If I'm being totally honest, hashtag truth talk, because Courtney already did it, I am less personally concerned about them. I believe they can navigate themselves through a financial planner to get what they want. I'm deeply concerned about the way that we need to evolve institutions to serve, maybe it's growing, maybe it's not, but an existing set of untethered workers in this country who don't have the same kind of access to curated benefits.
But to your point, and please feel free to jump in on this if you're in the room and you are an insurance provider.
Yeah.
I know there's a few of them in the room about this, but I think it's one of those things where, is there a market creating, facilitating function that can happen? And I do think that that is in the works.
I think it's a huge opportunity.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say from the sort of state program perspective, I mean, California is going to be a huge example for this. There is an interest in utilizing the platforms of our retirement programs to do direct work with gig workers. I mean, it's going to be sort of the same challenge, right? Like, you got to get people to go out and get it on their own, but there's the potential for partnerships between larger entities that are interested in seeing what can happen. So
And there's a couple more questions, so let's go ahead and take both questions, and then we'll try to wrap up with a round of things. I think we're still in good timing.
On secure choice, could you talk about the cost of administration and investment management? I was somewhat unclear whether Illinois is just subcontracting.
Yep. I'll do that really quickly. So by law, we are capped at 75 basis points all in. So that includes administrative and investment management fees. Those are not put on the employer. Those are fees that are on participants, the way you would if you have an IRA or a small business plan anyway. Our board is incredibly focused on reducing fees to be as low as possible over time. But what you find in Illinois and the other states is there's not a huge influx of state money that's going towards funding and sustaining the program. It needs to be self-sustaining on its own. So we have a very limited budget for our startup and implementation. All of that is tracked, and over time, as the assets in the program grow, we'll be required to pay down the loan that we've received for startup. So it's, when you look at the cost, it's more expensive than if an individual could go out and just grab a Vanguard fund on their own and have the initial $500 or $1,000 to get into that. But most of our folks are contributing about $33 every paycheck. So it's less expensive than certain small business plans that you find, which kind of range between 50 basis points and 100 and something. So we fall into the mix and feel pretty affordable based on small business plans that exist out there.
Go ahead and grab there's two questions here. I want to grab all the questions because I know we're actually okay with time right now, aren't we, Phoebe? About 7 minutes. Let's go ahead and hear all the questions and see where we go with this.
Yeah, I guess a question for you on the college debt situation. And you were talking about some students who go to college and yet don't need a college degree for their job, which is kind of a provocative statement. It's true. I'm just curious in terms of the work you've done, what % of students, and you said that before, across the country don't need to go to college? And if you had a clean slate right now and could tell students who are going to college, what % would you tell not to go to college? For the next 4 years.
So hold your answer for a second. Go ahead. Right beside you was a question?
Oh, don't worry. It's fine. We have time for that.
I was going to ask Courtney, what's the objection on the other side of the work you're doing? Because it seems to be such common sense. Why isn't this a federal program? And what's the argument against what you're working on?
Sure.
I'm going to help you answer that one too, because I can't help myself.
Thank you. This is a great panel. Thanks for being here. Can you help me understand one really basic thing about savings? It seems like we don't incentivize Americans to save. We actually penalize them twice, if my understanding is correct. We have them, it's not pre-tax money, it's post-tax money, all your state, federal, and local taxes. And then once they put money into a savings account, they're taxed again at the end of the year if they've actually accumulated anything. So when I think about savings, there's no product that I know of like a health savings account that's all pre-tax dollars. And I'm wondering if anyone knows about something like that for like short-term emergency funds or things like that.
Great. Yeah. And you had a question right up here. Thank you, guys. These are great questions.
I had a quick question about time. And I think that the lower income people spend a lot of time doing other things, such as standing in line for a homeless shelter or standing in line for something else, while at that time they could actually be earning. And I just want to learn about some innovations in that space on how Maybe it's not increasing the base, or maybe that's a different problem, but how can we help them spend their transportation time more effectively? Like, I can take an Uber or Lyft while they have to use public transportation that's cheaper, and it takes them 3 times as long to get to work, whereas in that amount of time they could be earning.
I have a great innovation.
You're going to
example
say,
for you.
we're going to start there and go backwards, and I'm also going to say behind you in the orange, Marielle, who runs the Center for Advanced Hindsight at Duke University, can spend all day talking about that. Okay, so we've got 5 minutes, we've got 4 questions, we've got 4 panelists.
All right, we're
go
off to the
for it.
races. Very quickly, that's such a good point. Raza, yes, that is a super good point, right? It is also why, again, my true talk, like I'm less concerned about higher income folks trying to navigate the financial service world than folks who have a ton of other constraints on their own time and energy. So there's a lot of work to do there, and a lot of stuff people are trying to do, and where technology can fit into that outside of like fixing transportation systems, and that's not our area, but yes. There are 2 things I want to give an example of. One is this really cool innovator, Alistair Chang, who's here on campus, not here though, shame on you, Alistair, but who's doing work about how to use the laundromat, did you meet him? Yes, so for the rest of you, who's awesome, right? How to use the laundromat where families go every week, usually the same day, you spend 2 hours there. He started doing it around literacy for children, so he worked with librarians to come in and do reading programs. He recently surveyed many of the families that come into the laundromat. He's been buying them up so that it becomes a for-profit, nonprofit venture. And their top issues were financial, actually, and they said, like, I hear the library stuff, I am awake at night about these financial issues. So he's working with different advisors and came to talk to us about what ways they can use that time effectively around making progress towards financial stability goals. It's a super cool time thing. The only other thing I want to bring up is where technology has been really good is around how to apply for benefit, how to create more like seamless access to certain kinds of benefits, like earned benefits as an example. Why am I forgetting?
Propel,
which is a for-profit company.
And Alice.
And Alice about how to get, thank you. Ida should have answered that, which is another for-profit fintech company about how to access employer benefits like transit subsidy and things in ways that you can use texting and other quick back and forth so you're not standing at the line at the food stamp office or in your HR trying to, again, bring in more income for your family. So really smart innovators thinking about this, but not enough people. It's an encouragement for everyone to get in that game.
Great. And let's pivot over to the set of questions around retirement, around the innovation, who's against it.
Sure. So, I think really what it comes down to is when you're pushing a program like this, there's sort of 2 cohorts. The first was the financial services industry, and I should say this is changing. So we passed our legislation in 2014, 2015, and I really think that in the last 4 to 5 years, there's been a sort of a renewed push and understanding from a broader section. But at least in Illinois, there was this idea of you're moving into a market that we want that is ours. And I think we've changed that narrative to say this is actually a market that isn't being served. You're not going after these small employers with these lower or middle income workers, right? So that was one. I think the other one was the employer sector saying, you as the state tell us to do things all the time. This is another mandate that we don't have time for, we don't have the resources for. And that's one where if I get more than 30 seconds to walk through what this program is and how it works, you get an employer from ugh to, oh, I see what you're doing here, I'm game, let's jump on board. So lest I leave you with the thought that employers are all angry and not nice, what we've really seen is employers come to really appreciate this and adopt it, and once we get them to, hey, you've run your payroll a couple of times, they're in and they're excited that their employees are saving. So.
And I'm going to add to that, and then I'm going to switch it to you, because the questions were, who's objecting and why isn't it already federal? And then also, we're not incentivizing savings, which I think is important, which also talk to Mariel about as well. So I would say that the states are actually doing what has been federally proposed legislation for multiple years. This was bipartisan for many years. It just never passed, the automatic IRA at the federal level. There is renewed interest and new Senate and House legislation around a federal automatic IRA. It would be done in a way that would kind of grandfather in these state innovations over time. So I do think we are on our way to thinking about this as a societal problem. One of the things we do at Aspen is the Aspen Leadership Forum on retirement savings. And there has been a shift in the last couple of years of convening around people starting to get to the sense of We probably need to solve this problem holistically at the federal level, but we're still not there. We just don't like mandates in this country, and we need to get around to understanding that. And part of this is around the incentivization of savings. Most low-income folks don't itemize their taxes, so pre-tax savings doesn't help all that much, and then it's hard to get access to. So the post-tax piece is there, but you're right, we incentivize consumption so much in this country, and figuring out ways to incentivize and sell savings to people and make it easier and automatic to do is where a lot of the exciting innovation is happening. And I'm going to close it with you, back to education, back to who, but then I think any other kind of final comment, and then we really do want to end on time and let people be happy with us. So quickly.
This will be quick. So I think it's tough to answer because education is both a means and an end, right? And so if we answer that question just based on what the market is doing, then it's 45% or so. It's the people who go and they can't get jobs that utilize their degree, right? But because sometimes I'm the first in my family to go to college, sometimes, college, I go for the experience, for the friendships. College isn't just, I'm going to go and then get a job, right? It makes it a tough question. I think what we have to step back and think about, though, is how much is this costing us? And are there better innovations we can create to help prepare people for what is going to be a lifetime of earning and just building wealth? And right now, it's clear that the college infrastructure is really struggling to do that.
I want to thank the panel, Joanna, Courtney, Ufoso. I want to thank all of you. We'd love to talk to you more about what we're doing through our networks and at Aspen around financial security issues. So thank you again.
Thank you.